turning up. So Aygen and myself are going to be talking about mobile security, mobile standards, about the interaction and the work together that PCI SSC and EMVCo do. So, who are EMVCo?
I'm glad you asked. So EMVCo, we make payment specifications, card-based payment specifications. And we started with the famous chip that you have on your payment card. And that was the beginning of the global acceptance and interoperability that we provided and the security behind those card-based payments. So why does the work of EMVCo matter is mainly because nowadays you can rely on your payment card to work wherever you go in the world. The way we managed to make that happen is by having the approval and compliance program that we put together to make sure that every single implementation would work wherever you are and whichever card you use and whichever terminal you use. In terms of the specification, there was the beginning of the story, and that evolved very rapidly to all the contactless type of transactions, and now you have wearables, mobile, and it also moved on to remote commerce. So we have 3DS for authenticating you when you are making e-commerce transactions, as well as secure remote commerce and payment tokenization. So that's the evolution of our specifications. And we also created EMV marks. On your card, you have the contactless symbol that you can recognize very easily. So it brings the familiarity that you recognize when you walk into a store and when you use e-commerce. The logos are easily recognizable and brings you the familiarity to a transaction that you can trust. And then we work together because we can't do it alone. So industry collaboration and engagement is super important for us. In terms of industry engagement, we're not only doing a relation with, we're not exclusive, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine, that's fine.
We also work with ISO, we work with US Payment Forum, W3C and FIDO Alliance. We created the Web Payment Security Interest Group in order to make sure that the technologies all interact and work together. And we also interacting not only in the US, but also in Europe with the European Payment Council, ENISA for anything that's cybersecurity related. We also work with Nexo on the connectivity between the card and the terminal, global platform, GSMA. I can continue going forever, but NFC for the transaction, FIRA for the ultra-wideband transactions, so going beyond Bluetooth, Java Card Forum for the security requirements and so forth.
So what we're kind of saying here is that PCI SSC and EMVCo work together to help secure payments, but in different ways, but ways that are mutually compatible and integrate well together. PCI works on the environmental and operational security standards, how payment data is secured from the point at which it's accepted through where it's processed, stored and managed and so forth through the transaction lifecycle. And from an EMVCo point of view?
All the functional aspects, the level one, the contactless with the mobile transactions as well. We make sure that we have all the interoperability working depending on the different devices that are being used. We have all the security requirements on how we make sure that the secrets stay on the card and remain on the card. And then we go beyond that in terms of the protocols related to the communication that you have between the card and terminal, but also for the remote commerce with the tokenization, secure remote commerce, and 3DS.
3DS, exactly. So what we're trying to do here is achieve a landscape, and I think we've managed to do this very well over the years, achieve a landscape where transactions can be performed in a way where it's going to work and in a way that it's going to be done securely. Arman was talking about making sure that these chip cards, the mobile phones that you might use to make a payment with, they function correctly. And certainly, I don't know about many people in the audience, but I'm old enough to know that when I used to travel globally, my card didn't always used to work in the same way everywhere. And the fact that it does now, the fact that I can travel from Melbourne, Australia to Dublin and have my payment card work and have my payment transactions work in a secure way is very much based on the wonderful work that EMVCo do and the great work that PCI do as well. And so from that PCI point of view, we're securing the devices, the POIs, the point of interactions, where the payment card data is entered into at a point of sale, for example. How the PIN is secured, and we'll talk a little bit about PIN and what we call CVMs, or cardholder verification methods, in a minute. How the count data is then secured at those points and managed in a secure way through that transaction lifecycle, and not just in a face-to-face brick-and-mortar context, but in a remote context as well. People often think of EMVCo particularly in like a physical card point of view, but there's much more that you do there.
Yeah, there's also the digital card and all the tokenization and the remote commerce. For the purpose of this topic of using a mobile device for either payment, receiving the payment, or accepting the payment, we can narrow down some of the elements that EMVCo has been working on related to the security between the card and the terminal in terms of the physical properties as well as the protocols that are being used. Now I'm going to go a little bit more on the compliance. So the card has a specific size, and if you want to use contactless transactions, then basically there is a certain distance at which you could tap the card. There's different position in which you can tap the card. So these are all the different things that we've been working on in terms of the testing program to make sure that when you actually do that movement of tapping the card on a terminal, it feels seamless and it would work at a certain distance, and you can have that familiarity and confidence that it's going to work. And this happens because of that compliance program that we've put together. Behind all that security requirements, so we talked about seamless, interoperability, there's the security requirements that we talked about as well. The familiarity is, if you look at this image, you will recognize the two contactless indicator and the contactless symbol that you recognize either on the terminal or the card, and you know that if you have those logos, then you can use a contactless transaction, whether it's with a card or your mobile phone or even a wearable. Maybe soon your cap as well, Andrew.
Maybe my cap. I don't have my cap with me, so I can't pay by cap at the moment, but I do pay by watch on occasions. So we talked a little bit about CVM, cardholder verification method, and PIN, and it's a point where we do collaborate quite closely in different contexts. So, for example, there are different ways your PIN can be validated during a face-to-face transaction. There is offline PIN, where when you enter your PIN into the POI device, the PIN pad if you like, that PIN is transmitted to the card, and the card validates that that PIN is correct. Now that transaction can still be performed online. There are online transactions which use offline PIN. There's markets that prefer offline PIN or online PIN, for example. But there's also situations where the PIN is not sent to the card at all. It's sent all the way back to the issuer. And in fact, that's common for the cards that I have. For example, if I make a payment here in Dublin and I enter my PIN will be transmitted all the way back to Melbourne, Australia, probably. It depends on where my bank is located. And then that PIN will be validated as part of the transaction and come all the way back. How that PIN is transmitted, how it's validated, that is a process that is secured under our PCI PIN program. How the offline PIN is sent to the card, that's specified under EMVCo standards for how offline PINs are managed. They also have these things called CD-CVM. Once again, I apologize about acronyms. You can't come to one of these conferences without being overloaded on acronyms, so I apologize. But CD-CVM is Consumer Device Cardholder Verification Method. And what that means is if you're going to use something like a mobile phone, for example, to make a payment, you're using the phone as a substitute to a card, what we call a payment instrument, because they're not just cards that you pay with now. You can authenticate yourself as a cardholder on your phone. That is CD-CVM. You are authenticating yourself on this system, and then you can tap that, for example, onto a payment device, onto a pad, and that is secured. How the CD-CVM is secured, how that process is managed, how the cryptographic keys and the card data is secured on your mobile phone, that's specified under EMVCo processes. We now have things like Spock and MPOC, and we'll be talking about MPOC later on, where you can have your card data entered either through an SCRP in a Spock context, and the PIN is entered into a mobile phone, or you can have in MPOC both the PIN and the card data entered into a single device, and how that is secured, how that data is managed and then sent off, that is specified under a PCI standard. So to kind of clarify where that boundary is, if it's your card on your device, your mobile phone, how that data is secured, that's under EMVCo specifications. If you're taking your data and entering it, your PIN, into a merchant phone, if this is your phone, if I'm going to enter my PIN into that phone, then how that is secured, that is done. I'm not going to enter my PIN right now. How that is secured, there's a camera, right? It's not secure. How that is secured is under PCI standards.
This is really important because in the first instance, when you tap the card or you insert the card, we validate the legitimacy of the card by doing the cryptographic function between the terminal and the card. Now, the PIN is not always required, depending on the regions. You may or may not have it, but the PIN is actually quite useful to make sure that you are the rightful owner of the card and is verifying using something that you know. And when you enter it using your own device, then the beauty of the CDCVM is that you can use something else than the PIN, which could be your biometrics, for example. So these are the different additional areas that we add on top of it. We've been talking a lot about using the mobile phone as a payment instrument, like an extension of your card. And this evolution has happened through the years. 97 is probably when we saw the first experiments being done using a mobile device to make a payment. NFC has helped a lot in order to provide convenience, because it's very difficult to slot a mobile phone into a terminal, right? So tapping it is a lot easier.
I try it every now and then.
No. And then we have all this evolution that happened. And the inflection points probably around 2014, 2015, you would agree, right? So when you have an exponential growth of those mobile payment solutions coming out. So they could be the ones provided directly by the phone manufacturers like Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, Google Pay, but also all the different software-based mobile payment solutions. We have evaluated about more than 100 different either SDKs or software-based mobile payment solutions from a security perspective. So that shows quite a lot of adoption in these technologies. On the acceptance side, it's been a little bit slower. So mostly using dedicated hardware, but we see these solutions coming into the market more and more, and we'll see the evolution of those. But again, I think we are right now in the middle of that inflection point on using a mobile device as an acceptance device, and that's probably why we're on stage right now.
Probably, yes. And I think that's an important point in terms of it took a while from when we could put our cards on our mobile phones to the stage we are now where people are quite often using those mobile phones as payment instruments. We're now seeing that happen with the acceptance devices, taking a mobile phone and using that to read a contactless card so that as a merchant you can accept a transaction through that system. And I think we're going to see an uptake of that over time. So quick, I'd like to do a little bit of audience participation. I apologize. If you want to run away now, you better run. So very quickly, who has a payment card? Once again, if you don't, you're probably in the wrong conference. Okay, who has a contactless payment card? Okay, who has their contactless payment card also stored in a mobile phone, a watch, something like that? Okay, still most people. Who has used that to make a payment during the last week? Most people, I would say. It went down a little bit every time, but I think most people are doing that. If I had done that 5 years ago, I think there'd be one or two early adopters who had their hand up. That has changed quite rapidly, but because the change has been in the background, people haven't quite noticed as much.
I think there's a really nice picture over there where the guy is using his mobile device in order to get onto a public transport system. And I think having this open payment being introduced in transit, like in New York or London, really helped get people's behavior to change. The adoption of that contactless movement has been a great driver of the increase in usage and adoption of contactless.
Yep.
Now we can look at the evolution on the payment acceptance side. So on the left-hand side, you see the traditional terminal that goes through a very stringent testing from the approval side, from the terminal testing and terminal approval, security requirements behind it, and basically you have a great user experience because of these requirements. Our level 1 specification is looking at the different position at which you can tap up to 4 centimeters. The incremental step that we saw happen with dedicated hardware that you use attached to your mobile phone. So we see these devices that either are connected directly to the mobile phone or they communicate with it via Bluetooth, but they are also being tested around the same requirements and provide the same level of user experience, seamless, interoperable. What we see happening now is an increased adoption on those mobile devices directly. So no dedicated hardware, we use the hardware that has been provided, and then we look at how the user experience happen on that side. And we realize that the performance is not as good as the terminals that have been designed specifically for payment.
Yeah, and so when we're looking at this image, the dedicated terminals are designed for essentially one purpose or one primary purpose, which is to accept payments. And they're designed to do that in a very interoperable and secure way. Your mobile phones are not primarily designed to make payments or accept payments. And so the NFC subsystems, the contactless subsystems on those, aren't as robust, aren't as able to operate within the same ranges as the systems that you see on your regular PTS terminals, if you like.
So in our discussions with the NFC Forum, obviously they have a wide range of use cases. It could be automotive, it could be access control. You can use your mobile device now to get into your hotel room as well, for example. So they have a variety of use cases. Payment is one of them. So that's the kind of communication we have with them in order to see how the payment use cases fit into the big picture. In terms of the rise of the mobile acceptance, a lot of these, we took on this role based on our advisors' feedback. Main feedback came from the merchants saying, yes, we would like to see those different use cases in different environments where we may need additional terminals. It could be small stores that want to probably have more terminals for a very specific amount of time because there's a surge of people coming in. It could be events like music festivals or things like that. Or it could be just more of a, football club of your son or your daughter that wants to do a special event and they might want to receive payments. So there's different use cases. It could be independent, it could be small, or it could be a larger organization. So the different use cases in these scenarios create different user experiences. Some of them would use only mobile devices, consumer mobile devices. Some others will use professional devices that have designed for other use cases like inventory in the store, and there's NFC on it. It's like, why can't I use it for payment kind of situation?
Yep.
So how do we handle that?
Good question.
So we look at basically the way the card and the mobile device would communicate. It could be the card, actually. It could be another mobile device.
Correct, yes.
It could be a ring. It could be your cap.
Could be my cap.
So we look at how are the minimum acceptance criteria in order to make that payment possible. So this is the area that we've been looking at and making some tests in order to define new acceptance criteria beyond our terminal approval program. But that's only part of the story.
It is, yes. So once these systems are able to accept cards, able to accept payments from contactless payment instruments, they need to then be able to do that in a secure way, and that is where PCI SSC comes in with our standards like EMVCo, which I will be talking about a little bit later on. How you enter the PIN in a secure way, how that contactless read of that card data can be managed in a secure way, what you're doing with remote communications to PIN processing, payment processing environments, and how you might have external environments, we call attestation and monitoring environments, or A&M, that provide for validation of the operating systems, of the applications that are used to accept these payments, to make sure that compromises haven't happened, to make sure something isn't going strangely, make sure those environments can perform those transactions in a secure way.
So we had this user experience guideline in order to see where you can tap, how you can tap. On the terminal, it's very well indicated. No questions asked, you know what to do. On a mobile device, it might be on the front, it might be on the back, it might be on the screen. You don't necessarily know. There are APIs that allows you to actually know where the antenna is. So soft POS vendors will recommend you to use those APIs. So you may want to display where and how to tap to have that convenience in terms of the user experience. But we went from basically, I'm the card, you're the terminal.
Yes.
We went from a seamless experience where
With
we are
Okay.
we're comfortable distance.
Yeah. Seamless. This works
seamless. Works really well. Then we looked at what were the reduced range criteria in order to make the payment possible.
Possible.
It's possible.
I could do this.
Not too uncomfortable.
No, not too bad.
But we didn't want to go too uncomfortable
Yeah.
either.
So the way COTS devices read at the moment, it's
A little bit, too
Yeah,
close.
no, that's-
Okay,
that's
I'd rather
okay.
this way. Yeah. So we're going to see what we came up with in the next slide. So we define new reduced range approval process. Based on the tests that we have done, we found out that there were two possible ranges. So reduced range 2 centimeters and reduced range 1 centimeter in order to make those payments possible. No criteria in terms of defining which devices are eligible, but basically an indication that we really want to go from a possible payment back into the seamless. So over the years, the 2 centimeters is intended to increase up to 4 centimeters. Now, you can't really improve what you can't measure. And we knew those devices were not coming for testing because they knew they would not pass the terminal approval process. Now we will be able to start measuring them and give feedback so that the next generation of those products are doing better.
Yep. And so that's what EMVCo are doing on the COTS side. And when we say COTS, commercial off the shelf, we're talking primarily about mobile phones and tablets.
Not only.
Not primarily, from a PCI side, we're creating standards, and we've got standards out there like SPOC and CPOC. We have our MPOC standard now, our mobile payments on COTS. So this is a standard that allows you to accept payments on these devices in a secure way, but in many different ways. Maybe you're going to have an external device. We talked about those external kind of dongles that might plug in or connect over Bluetooth. You might use one of those to read the card because maybe you do want that 5 centimeter distance. You want that really good read range that you get on that dedicated payment hardware. But you want the PIN, perhaps, to be entered on the mobile phone. That's perfectly possible under MPOC. Perhaps you want to just read the contactless card and not have any PIN. You want to read the card on the mobile phone itself, but you don't need PIN-based CVM. And that's perfectly possible under MPOC and something that some markets support quite well. But maybe you want to have perhaps both the card being read on the contactless interface of the mobile phone and the PIN being entered on that same mobile phone, perhaps, during a transaction, perhaps because you need to provide strong customer authentication. That is possible under MPOC as well. All of these modes and mixes and matches of these modes, all possible under the MPOC standard. Now, we do have some rules around the requirements. It must support at least one form of EMV-based card entry because EMV does a great job at securing payment card data, and we want to make sure that we facilitate those transactions to be performed. We want to make sure that the phone or the tablet is actually being used in some sort of transactional context. So if you have an external POI device, for example, and it's just using the phone as a modem, if you like, a communications method, nothing is actually being transacted on the phone, that's not really MPOC, that's outside of the scope. We also don't want to have magnetic stripe only transactions, once again, because EMVCo have done a great job at creating secure ways to provide payment instruments. And there are other requirements that exist in there as well. This is on a solution basis. You can have individual transactions that are MSR only, no problem. You can have individual transactions that maybe don't collect cardholder data directly on the device, also no problem. A question that often comes up is, what exactly do we mean by COTS? And I said mobile phone or tablet mostly. We do have requirements around this within the MPOC standard. This might be different to how, for example, EMVCo defines COTS, because they're different standards, we're different companies, different processes, and so forth. But under MPOC, we're talking primarily about a mobile phone or tablet. Primarily, probably something running Android or iOS. However, it doesn't have to. There's nothing in the standard of MPOC that says you must run Android or iOS. We allow for different operating systems as long as they meet the criteria that we have in there. It doesn't have to be a consumer device. It doesn't have to be, for example, a phone you would buy and you'd use primarily for making phone calls. It could be commercial devices. We do have rules, however, that it cannot be something that is designed specifically for payments. It can't be a bare board device. We're not approving subcomponents. And it can't be something that integrates an SCRP within the form factor. And it can't be a multi-part device either. So you can't have, for example, the payment acceptance function on a watch and most of the other features on a mobile phone where they're split apart. That's not what MPOC supports at this point.
Yeah, that's probably one of the reasons why we decided not to use COTS anymore, because we had a lot of questions around, what fits in it and what doesn't. Yeah.
So there's different ways you can put MPOC solutions together. One of them we call a monolithic approach. And this is essentially what was done under SPOC and CPOC, where there is one entity and they do everything. They create the applications, they do the attestation monitoring, they do the payments acceptance, all those things. There would be one solution listed. That solution would have one or more MPOC applications listed as part of it, perfectly fine under MPOC. However, you can do it in different ways. So you can create under MPOC solutions that rely on other listed components or other listed products. We have 3 different types of listed MPOC products. There is the MPOC software product, the attestation and monitoring service, and the MPOC solution. So you can build what we call a composite solution on top of a listed MPOC software product where some other organization has already done the work to create the software, to create SDKs that might execute or be integrated into an application that executes within the COTS device, as well as the attestation monitoring software that then somebody says, okay, we're going to take that software and we're going to implement that in our solution, and we're going to have our own applications that perhaps run that SDK or integrate that SDK. We're going to reference the MPOC software products that are listed. And then there's a third option where we can have the attestation and monitoring services that are listed that rely on MPOC software, and they execute that attestation and monitoring. That's the validation of that operating system, the application in which the MPOC application is executing. And then you can build a composite solution on top of that, which references the MPOC software, references the attestation monitoring services, has the own applications, and then there's operational aspects that exist on top of that in terms of key management, vulnerability management, merchant management, these sorts of things. So there are different ways you can deploy these as well. I won't go too far into depth on this because I don't have enough time, but you can have a solution where you have the acquiring functions that are separate from the overall MPOC solution. There are requirements in domain 5 of the MPOC standard that says there must be a merchant relationship and merchant communication path. That path can be implemented in different ways. It does not necessarily mean that you must have the ownership of the merchant account relationship. The intent is to make sure that there is a communication path so that when things are detected by the attestation monitoring, they can be communicated through to the merchant who's using the application.
And then if you go one layer beyond that, depending on which device it's being used on, you may have a different user experience. And that's one of the area where we want to help the industry in order to help choose a device that will give a seamless experience, a possible experience, and yeah, then the other ones which are not being tested, we don't really know how they perform.
So we have a listing lifecycle for MPOC as well. It's a 3-year listing lifecycle. Once you have your MPOC product that is validated, it will be listed for 3 years. However, there is an annual checkpoint that is required at the anniversary of the primary listing. Now, because we're wonderful people, we do give you up to 90 days initially for your submission, your annual checkpoint to be late. During that first 90 days, let's say if you submit your product is listed on the 1st of January 2024, 1st of January 2025, we haven't received the annual checkpoint, it's late, that's fine. There will be a change in the listing that indicates that there is something that is late, but the listing isn't removed, the listing isn't invalid. It just indicates that there is something that is late. 91 days later, there is then a secondary expiry indicator that basically changes color, essentially, to say this is now over 90 days late, but we still allow another 90 days for it to be listed, still valid, just indicated that we haven't received and been able to process the annual checkpoint at that time. However, after 180 days, so basically if the report was received, the initial report, January 2024, we're now in the middle of 2025, June 2025, 180 days from when that checkpoint should have been submitted. That's the point at which if we haven't received something, it would be essentially moved to the expired list, indicated as expired, because we haven't received that annual checkpoint at that point. And what I do want to stress is, if you get something to us on day 181, it's not 1 day late, it is 181 days late, so please don't do that. Now, MPOC is built on some foundational assumptions around how solutions will operate, how solutions work, the security and operation of the environments within a COTS system. And this includes things like, different from the terminals we've talked about, the dedicated hardware terminals, the solution vendor, the person who is implementing these things, does not control this platform. They're not creating the hardware necessarily. They're not creating the operating system. They're implementing essentially a solution, an application that performs on this hardware to do things. And importantly, the security of these things changes over time. So what might be perfectly acceptable today, it's a fully patched, fully implemented, completely secure COTS device today, at some point in the future will no longer be that, because security changes. That might be 3 years from now, it could be 5 years from now, it could be 10 years from now, it's hard to say. But this is why we want to have that communication path from the solution provider to the merchant, so we can tell them, hey, your system's not being updated anymore. It's no longer secure. You need to move to a newer version, a newer phone, these sorts of things. So this is why we have the attestation and monitoring systems to validate the security of those environments, and we require that there are ongoing vulnerability management and detection processes by the people who implement these systems.
And we do the same on the annual review because the threat landscape changed, new vulnerabilities are being found, so we want to make sure that everything is the best secured way as possible.
Best it can be.
Yes.
So I've talked about annual checkpoints. This slide here is not intended to be read, very small text. It's in the program guide.
You're not going to read it?
I'm not going to read it out directly. You know, don't want to put everybody to sleep just yet. But the intention here is this is indicating that there are requirements around BAU practices that are validated at those annual checkpoints, and we have an FAQ on that. So please be aware that during this process, during your listing, as part of the assumptions on which the MPOC program is foundationally built, there is the intent that there is an ongoing vulnerability management process, an ongoing attestation and monitoring process. You are performing actions as BAU if you are implementing these MPOC software products, these solutions. So please be aware that if you get to your annual checkpoint, it's not going to be acceptable to say, oh yeah, we haven't done any of that, but we'll do it now, absolutely, but we didn't do it throughout the year. That's the foundational assumption that it has to be performed because that's where the security for these programs come from. So be aware, there are BAU expectations when you implement these sorts of programs. Now, I'm very fond of putting up old slides in my presentations. So this was a slide I presented last year. If you're looking at that and wondering why it says 2022, it's not a mistake, not for this slide. This is where we were. This is what I was presenting last year. I was saying, okay, we're updating the standard. We're hopefully going to get it out by the end of the year. We're working really hard on it.
So where are we now?
So where are we now? This is where we are now. So we have the standard that has come out. We have the program guide that has come out. We have technical FAQs that are updated regularly. And we have attestations that can be filled out to be submitted for these annual checkpoints and the primary validation as well. So that's the current status as of today. If we look back in time, you mentioned 2015 as kind of an inflection point. Now, I don't want to say that was us, but I think it's coincidental that Arman and myself in 2015, in different contexts, we were both at that time looking at mobile payments and how they could work in an interoperable way. And this photograph, which is literally from 8 years ago now, I think.
Yes, it was, I think, Money 2020.
Yeah, Money 2020. And the demonstration we're making here was that the process was not seamless.
No.
That there weren't standards that allowed it to be performed in a secure way.
Not sure it was even possible.
It may not even be possible. I think what it was
uncomfortable.
And so we've now worked together as organizations to create those standards on which these transactions can be performed in a possible, in a seamless, in a secure way. And we're going to continue doing that to make sure that the next types of payments that might come up can be performed as well.
Why don't you take your terminal out and we can take a new picture to say, hey,
okay,
this is possible now.
Doable. Thank you very much.
Thank you.